welcome back to the Morning Update Show. And right now, we're joined by Dr. Howard J. Gale of SeattleStop.org. How are you today?
Good. Thank you, Omari.
All right, welcome to the Morning Update Show.
Thank you.
All right, we finally got you here. We'll jump right into it. We actually got a few minutes here today. Our schedule got rearranged a bit, so we have more time for discussion. So first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and then what is SeattleStop.org?
Sure. So I'm originally a New Yorker. I've been living in Seattle for about 23 years now. My training is as a research psychologist. So not a clinical psychologist, but a research psychologist. I've been an activist my whole life since I was about 13 or 14 years of age. And most recently, my activism has been on behalf of police accountability. So that's briefly about me. SeattleStop.org is a project to try to get real accountability in Seattle through a citizens initiative. And I think before I talk about what Seattle Stop is, I think I should say, just really briefly, police accountability is often confused with police reform, and they're not the same. So police reform is a spectrum of anything from reforming the police, trying to retrain them, as Bruce Harrell would suggest, maybe having pizza with them on Fridays if they go a week without shooting people. There's that end of police reform, and then there's defunding, which might be a little bit of defunding, taking away money from the police department to actually have alternatives for community safety, violence interrupters. And then the other end of that spectrum would be abolition, would be getting rid of police. So there's a whole range of options when we're talking about from police reform to police abolition. Regardless of where you are on that spectrum, we have to have accountability. And the reason for that is even if we faced a future where there were no police, we still have people that are acting with some authority of the state or the city to make decisions about people's lives. And there has to be accountability for that. So regardless of where you stand on the policing issue, there has to be accountability for public safety. So that's, I think, what Seattle Stop is about, is having real accountability, and accountability that's based in the community and based on civilians in the community.
What got you into this realm of police accountability?
As I said, I've been an activist my whole life. I'm from New York. I've been beat up by police. I've been falsely arrested by police. I've had federal cases where I've won against the police for abuse. So I've experienced it. I grew up in a neighborhood in New York. At the time, my neighborhood on the Upper West Side of Manhattan was a low-income neighborhood. There was a lot of violence. There was a lot of police abuse. So it's something that I've always been concerned about. I think starting back in 2010 with the John T. Williams killing, which was the Native American woodcarver who was shot by a police officer, I became very involved in this.
Just 11 years ago, just the other
right.
year. Yeah.
Right. It's 11 years ago, end of August. Right.
All right. So why don't you explain to our audience what the current accountability, I mean, we're live, so you can't take forever, but what the current accountability system is.
So,
but then hold on, let me tell you what the current accountability system is, what's wrong with it, and what you guys propose.
Okay. So again, because we don't have a lot of time, I can give you mentioned John T. Williams. So John T. Williams was killed in 2010, 11 years ago. If we look at, I actually wrote the numbers down. If we look at the 10 years before John T. Williams was killed, the Seattle Police Department killed 26, possibly 27 people. 26 or 27 people. After John T. Williams was killed, that marks the beginning of police reform in Seattle. So in those 10 years or 11 years now of police reform, we've killed 31 people. The SPD has killed 31 people. So what I would ask the audience is to consider, how do we have police reform if in the 10 years after John T. Williams, we've managed to kill more people? The other thing we saw from the summer of 2020 is that more than 99.9% of the really egregious cases of police abuse have gone without accountability. We have officers that got written or written, whatever they call it, written, not discipline, but a slap on the wrist for all that abuse last summer. So I think the way accountability is working right now is it's police investigating police. So the Office of Police Accountability is the only body that's tasked with actually investigating police abuse or a police complaint. Of the 12 individuals in that office that actually do the investigation, 10 of them are police sergeants. These are police sergeants who actually rotate out from regular SPD duty into the OPA. After 2 years, they go back. So we're expecting that police sergeants who have to work with the same officers that they're going to investigate are going to be truly independent investigators. Now, there are 2 investigators that are civilian in the OPA. Those civilian investigators are prohibited from investigating any serious abuse. So if we take, for example, something like the Terry Caver killing in 2020, May of 2020, the OPA just released a report on that last week. That killing was investigated only by police officers. And the conclusions that the OPA and Andrew Meyerberg, the director, came to are basically the same conclusions that the Seattle Police Department came to. They mirror each other. So there's no independence. So what Seattle Stop is proposing is that we have a purely civilian-based system similar to what they have in Nashville, where there's one body. So in Seattle, we have 3 bodies. We have the OPA, which acts independently and has no community control. They investigate the police. We have the OIG, who's supposed to investigate the OPA if they behave badly. And as we've recently seen with the article by Carolyn Bick in the South Seattle Emerald, in fact, the OIG is not doing its duty to oversee the OPA. They're actually avoiding overseeing the OPA. And then we have the Community Police Commission. That's the third part. So there's the OPA, OIG, and the CPC, Community Police Commission. And the Community Police Commission, since its inception, has failed to criticize or to take action in almost any case. So what we're proposing, instead of having this bizarrely articulated system where no one knows who's responsible, you have one body, a community body. They hire independent investigators who are not and have not been police to investigate the police, and that they hold open meetings where people can actually see the internal workings of the system.
So I know that in speaking with OPA and Director Meyerberg, one of the issues that their office has is that they have to match up something against a policy, right? And so it's like, and what there's a finding one time, so it was last year, where he had made over 80 recommendations to the Seattle Police Department to change a policy. And he's like, his office is bound by a policy. Did this officer violate the policy? Not if the policy is correct or incorrect, he can make a recommendation on that. Right. But that being said, doesn't it seem, it seems to me like if people want actual accountability, then policies need to be able to have to change as to, the policies that guide the actual police, no matter who's investigating. If whatever they've done is not out of policy, then even an investigator will say that it's still in policy.
Right. So let me give you a concrete example, the way this works in Nashville. I witnessed a session back in March in the Nashville Community Oversight Board, where there was a question about two officers who constantly went to a woman's house and tried to do a warrantless search for the woman's son. They did this about 8 or 9 times without a warrant. And the investigators in the Nashville Community Oversight Board investigated and said, okay, they violated certain policies. What the board said when looking at that investigation is that's not acceptable. It goes beyond just violating policies. So for example, an officer in Nashville can do a warrantless search if they get the homeowner to actually sign a statement. The officers were claiming we forgot the paperwork. The homeowner gave us her verbal permission, which was not true. But again, there's a lack of a paper trail. So what the board asked in Nashville is, how is it possible that an officer went 9 times to the same house and each of those 9 times forgot the paperwork? So this is not a policy question. And I would say the same thing happens in Seattle. Andrew Meyerberg is deflecting responsibility. So, for example, in the Caver case, what Meyerberg found is that Officer Gregorio, who shot Caver, violated a policy of de-escalation, but did not violate a policy for use of force. How did he manage to separate those two factors? He separated them by making assumptions that Terry Caver was intentionally and by choice turning around with the intent to stab or kill Officer Gregorio. Terry Caver was he was a paranoid schizophrenic who was in extreme mental health distress. The police, 6 officers were chasing him with their guns drawn. They had a canine unit chasing him. This is a man who's already paranoid. There was enough information before they got to the scene to know that he was in mental distress, and yet they chose to escalate the situation. How do you separate then that from the use of force? Andrew is trying to parse those things in an artificial way, but worse than that, in saying that Officer Gregorio didn't violate the use of force, he's making assumptions about what Terry Caver's intentions were. So, for example, if you watch the Terry Caver video, what you will see is that he's shot with a taser, and the very split second he's shot with a taser, he's shot with a taser. He appears to turn around. What's not clear is he turning around because he's collapsing from the taser? Is he turning around because all of a sudden 2 police cars cut in front of him and he's trying to escape the police cars? We don't know that. But again, Andrew Meyerberg didn't ask those questions. So I think this attempt to say I can only hold officers responsible for policy violations is a little bit artificial, because in every one of the killings that Andrew Meyerberg has investigated, for instance, 2019, the SPD killing of Ryan Smith, also mental health distress with a knife, Andrew Meyerberg found that there was no policy violation, even though they also failed to de-escalate in that instance. So I think the problem, what you're identifying, let's break it down into two issues. Yeah, policy is a problem, but we have to be able to have an independent investigation where we can have faith.
Yeah, but the investigation, right? I'm not against that. What I'm saying though is that how can policies change? It's
Okay.
like, just like my other question.
Right.
Is just like, so you have the independent board, they come out, they're like, man, this is horrible, this is ruling, this is a bad policy. What's the mechanism now to actually change? Well, because Meyerberg sends over these policy recommendations to SPD, and it's up to SPD and the union to be like, maybe we'll take it, maybe we won't. And in what role does the actual contract with somebody like SPOG, how would they play into this, into the board or the council that you're proposing? Because SPOG has an incredible amount of power and negotiating power here in that contract. And we've seen that even when you talk about OIG and OPAs, particularly, they were intended to be much stronger than they actually are right now. But the city negotiated away a lot of the power that OPA and OIG was supposed to have in their contract with SPOG. So how would what you're proposing, how would it interact with this contract, as we know there's a lot of power coming from there?
Excellent question. So let's take those questions in reverse, the last one first. It's very important to realize that people keep on saying the SPOG contract took away a lot of power. That is a false claim. Here's the reason. If SPOG had said, City of Seattle, you get everything you want in the 2017 ordinance, Andrew Meyerberg would still be the decider of discipline, and we would still have majority of officers investigating.
He'd also have subpoena power too.
Right, he'd have subpoena power, but what is the point of subpoena power if you're not going to fully investigate? That's my argument. My argument is, even if we had the full effect of the 2017 police reform and accountability ordinance, we would still have police investigating police.
Is the issue with the actual office, or was it with the director?
Both. Actually, what I would say is we should never place ourselves in a position, this is what they decided not to do in Nashville. And by the way, They're making the same decision. They've already voted that last November in Portland and in Oakland and in other cities. They've made a decision. We can't have a God that heads up an agency to make these kinds of weighty decisions. We're all fallible. I wouldn't want to be the head of that agency. I wouldn't trust you, even though I love you and trust you otherwise. I wouldn't trust you with that power. No one should be trusted with power. That power should be vested in the community. So to go back to your question, here's what would happen, what does happen in Nashville, and what we're proposing in seattlestop.org. Our proposal is that there's one board. That board does the investigations. If it turns out there's a policy violation or not a policy violation, if it's what's called lawful but awful, that board has the ability to say, we need to change this policy. And under our initiative, that would be mandatory. The police chief would not have an option. What we actually wrote in, which would be legal, is an oversight or civilian control board would actually make a decision about a change in policy, would then forward that to the police chief. If the police chief agreed with that, it would go into effect. If the police chief disagreed and the board maintained its position that we need to change this policy, then it would go to the city council. The point being that the city council then, in an open and public process, would make that decision. Now, I want to get to your other point, which is really important. What about the police contract? Here's the answer. In Nashville, in 2018, they had a citizens initiative that was voted on by, I think, 55% of the population. When the new police chief came into the city of Nashville, he said, who am I to overrule the clear wishes of the majority of people in Nashville? Do you think the police union fought it? They didn't. So that's the answer. Instead of rendering this as a political problem where the council and the mayor and SPOG all debate each other, we bring this into the public. We have a clear vote on it. And once we have a majority opinion that is in favor of this kind of process, I think the police are going to be in an untenable position. We still have to, there's still mandatory bargaining. We're still going to have to bargain a contract, but as happened in Nashville, and I will say, by the way, not just Nashville. In Newark, it's a much more rough process, but Ras Baraka, the son of the famous poet Amiri Baraka, in 2016, put in place a radical new civilian oversight. The police balked at that. That's going to have to be fought out in the courts. We're going to see what happens in Oakland. We're going to see what happens in Portland. But here's the thing. We've been doing police reform in Seattle for 120 years and it hasn't worked. We have to try something different. So what I would say is a one-stop shop, community board makes all the decisions about policy, about investigations and discipline.
We've only got a few seconds left.
Good.
One, how would people get on this board? But two, an even bigger picture, like how would this process come about? It goes on a ballot,
right?
Or it's just something.
Exactly, initiative, right? We're talking city initiative, not state. City. Right. So city initiative to answer, and then quickly, our vision is to have a 21-person board. There would be 7 people that would come from the organizations that are actually putting forth this initiative. Then there would be 7 people chosen by the city council, not the mayor, which is our current process for choosing the community police commission. So 7 people chosen, or not chosen, 7 people that come out of the initiative process, 7 people from the city council, and then the last third, the other 7, would then be in an open community process that's put forth by the 14 initial board members. So again, everything here is about transparency and trying to invest the community in being involved in this. Very different from what we have.
So before we let you go, how can people get up with you? And
So let me, before I forget, let me say 2 things because we didn't get a chance to talk about the Caver killing and the report that came out, which actually shows really clearly the failures of the OPA and Andrew Meyerberg and the failures of our system. So if you go to tinyurl.com/justice for Caver, that's tinyurl.com/justice for Caver, CAVER. You can read all about my analysis of that. And again, to get in touch, it's seattlestop.org, seattlestop.org. And again, this is a work in progress. We're hoping to get something on the ballot. And part of our hope, I-940, which got rid of malice and did a lot to forward police reform statewide, we're still kind of stuck with having police investigate police. We don't do that for doctors. We don't do that for nurses. We don't do that for teachers. We don't do that in any other aspect of our system, but we still have police investigating police. So in order to change that statewide, I believe the way to do that is to get something working in Seattle, which can then be used as a model.
All right, Dr. Howard J. Gale, seattlestop.org. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.